A single mom has a scar identical to the Mafia boss's dead wife. He grabbed her arm. Who are you? New York, the winter of 2022. The night was heavy with relentless rain, the wind slicing through the streets like lashes against the faces of the few who dared to walk, turning the avenues into muddy, cold, silent rivers. Rachel Monroe, 38 years old, a veterinarian at an emergency animal clinic on the east side of Manhattan, had just stepped out after a grueling 12-hour shift. The cuff of her navy coat still bore the stain of blood that had not yet been washed away. A golden retriever that had been hit by a car had died on the operating table only minutes before her shift ended. This was not the first death Rachel had witnessed, yet the sight of the 7-year-old owner sobbing uncontrollably, clinging to her neck and asking why the doctor could not save their dog, shattered her heart into pieces. A wave of failure, helplessness, and emptiness engulfed her, sinking her into the gray winter night. Unsure where to find refuge, Rachel turned into a small bar called Vincents, tucked behind a row of old brick buildings on Greenwich Street. The Italian-style bar was a rare sanctuary, bathed in warm yellow light, with low ceilings, exposed brick walls, and the scent of oak mingled with aged wine. Jazz music drifted faintly from an old speaker, seemingly unnoticed by anyone absorbed in their drinks. Rachel slid into a corner table near the window, removed her drenched coat, and ordered a hot chocolate spiked with whiskey. It was a strange concoction, comforting like a gentle embrace in the winter chill, yet strong enough to prevent her from sinking fully into the turbulent emotions threatening to overwhelm her. As her lips met the rim of the glass, the aroma of warm cocoa blended with the sharpness of the whiskey, making her eyes sting. She exhaled, unconsciously tracing the old scar on her left wrist, the faded intertwined letters R still visible under the soft glow of the table lamp. It was a relic of a stormy childhood, a blood oath she had almost forgotten. Outside, the rain continued to fall without pause, and the wind howled through the cracks of the door like a vague warning. The bar door suddenly swung open, letting in a rush of cold air that sent a few napkins fluttering from the counter. A group of men entered, clad in long black coats, their polished leather shoes echoing sharply against the worn wooden floor. Yet all eyes immediately fell on the man in front. He did not need to speak, did not need to act, but his presence carried an invisible weight that seemed to compress the very air. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharply chiseled features, sun-kissed skin that spoke of Italian heritage, and eyes so cold they seemed to have witnessed more than a lifetime could endure. Dominic Russo, 45 years old, entered as if stepping into his own domain. His gaze swept across the room, barely lingering on anyone until it rested on Rachel. She froze. A chill ran down her spine as their eyes met. She could not explain why, but she felt exposed, stripped bare in the crowded room. It was not the intensity of the stare itself, but the echo it awakened deep inside her, a primal fear rising from the furthest reaches of memory. Everything worsened as his gaze slid down to her wrist, where the scar peeked from beneath her sweater sleeve. Before she could react, Dominic approached. Without a greeting or a casual question, he gripped her wrist, firm but not brutal. He stared at the scar for what felt like an eternity, and Rachel felt time suspend around them. Dominic's expression shifted from curiosity to shock, then to a slow, simmering anger tinged with pain. The emotions surged unchecked, as though what he had just seen was proof of a loss that had never been explained. His voice was deep and hoarse, nearly breaking at the end of the words. He did not ask her name, did not ask who she was. He whispered just enough for her to hear above the distant jazz and the rain tapping on the tin roof outside. Who are you? If you are following this story and feel drawn in by its emotional twists, please subscribe to the Dear Single Mom channel, hit like, and share the video so you do not miss any of our other compelling stories every day. We would love to know where you are watching from, so leave a comment to let us know where you are listening, and see how Rachel and Angela's story has touched hearts everywhere. Rachel jerked her hand back slightly, but Dominic held her wrist for a few more seconds, as if he needed to be certain the scar was not a trick of her imagination. She felt his breath warm against the back of her hand, unhurried but charged with a quiet intensity. Then, as if drawn back into the present, Dominic released her, his eyes never leaving her confused face. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath in that moment. No one speaking, no one moving. Even the jazz music floating in the background felt distant. Rachel drew her hand back, covering her wrist with the sleeve of her sweater, her heart pounding so violently she felt it might leap from her chest. She did not know who he was, yet his gaze made her feel exposed, vulnerable, and somehow recognized. Dominic sat down in the chair across from her without asking, and the waiter, perhaps accustomed to his presence, silently placed a glass of bourbon on the table before retreating like a shadow. For several seconds, Dominic said nothing, merely holding Rachel's gaze as if seeking an answer to a question that had never been spoken. Finally, his voice emerged, hoarse and weary, like a man who had endured countless sleepless nights. "That scar," he said slowly, "is identical to the scar on my wife's wrist." Rachel furrowed her brow and leaned back slightly, unease spreading through her. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, striving to keep calm. But Dominic shook his head, his eyes sharp as blades. "I am not mistaken. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Her name was Angela. She had a scar just like that, on her left wrist, the same intertwined letters R." Rachel sat frozen, her breath caught in her chest. Angela. The name echoed like a voice from the bottom of a deep well of memory. Something inside her trembled, a fragment of a long-forgotten memory flickering into view, unclear yet enough to unbalance her heart. Dominic set his bourbon down, his gaze shifting from cold to urgent. "Do you know anyone named Angela? Did you ever live in an orphanage in Chicago?" Rachel went rigid. The question cut through the dust of buried memories. Santa Clarita, Chicago. 28 years ago. A childhood filled with echoes, nightmares, and the closest friend she had ever known. A sister, a half of her soul she had thought lost forever. She whispered, barely believing her own voice. "Angela? She was my best friend, when I was a child." Dominic closed his eyes, his shoulders trembling slightly, as if hearing something he had long awaited. He pulled a yellowed photograph from his inner coat pocket and placed it on the table. Rachel picked it up. The image captured a woman with a gentle smile, long chestnut curls, deep expressive eyes, and a heart-shaped pendant broken in half. She dropped the photo onto the table, her heart tightening. There could be no mistake. This was Angela, the little girl who had carved a matching scar on her wrist one bitter winter evening in the third-floor bedroom of the Santa Clarita orphanage. They had shared a heart pendant, promising to find each other if ever separated. And now, the man sitting before her was Angela's husband, the one who had lost her. But Angela could not be dead. She could not. Rachel's voice caught. Dominic looked at her, eyes heavy with loss. "Are you sure she is really gone? Then why is she here? Why did my wife die with a trail of unanswered questions? And why did her closest friend vanish without a trace?" Rachel did not know how to respond. Memories surged like a flood, fragments misaligned and spinning her mind. Yet deep in her heart, she knew. Tonight was no coincidence. The stranger in the bar was not merely a mysterious figure. He was the key to a past she had buried for decades. And when Dominic repeated the question once more, this time not with the voice of a stranger but with the voice of a man aching desperately for the truth, she could not ignore the whisper inside herself echoing back. "Who are you?" Rachel looked down at her cup of chocolate, now cold, her mind spinning as if she had just been pulled backward into a chapter of her life she had buried deep within the darkest drawer of memory. Dominic's question still hung in the air, needing no repetition, because she too was asking herself the same thing. Who was she, if the friend she had loved as her own sister was gone, and that friend's husband now sat across from her, his eyes shadowed with grief and uncertainty? Rachel clasped her hands tightly together to stop them from trembling. She looked up at Dominic, his expression no longer cold but clouded with the kind of darkness that belongs to a man too familiar with loss. "I do not have many happy memories of childhood," Rachel began in a whisper, as though speaking louder might shatter the fragile pieces of what she was about to recall. "I grew up in the Santa Clarita orphanage, about an hour's drive from Chicago. It was always cold there, even in summer. I do not remember many faces from that place, but I remember Angela. She was the only light. We shared the same bunk bed for 3 years. Angela would tell me stories at night so I could sleep, and she always gave me half her cookies. One night, after another girl was taken away without a word, we were terrified we might be separated too, so we took a sewing needle, pricked our left wrists, and carved the letters R intertwined, our initials. She kept one half of a heart-shaped pendant. I kept the other." Rachel tugged at the collar of her sweater and pulled from beneath it a small, scratched silver heart. The missing half had vanished with Angela the night she disappeared without explanation. Dominic stared at the pendant, his eyes widening with a mix of disbelief and recognition. His hand trembled slightly as he opened his leather wallet and withdrew an old beige handkerchief. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed the other half of the heart. Rachel did not need to fit the two pieces together to know they matched. Her chest tightened. He had kept that half for 3 years, ever since Angela's death. Rachel's voice was barely audible. "Can you tell me what happened to her?" Dominic nodded but did not speak immediately. He lifted his glass of bourbon, took a small sip, and set it down slowly. 3 years ago, Angela left home one morning without saying exactly where she was going. She told me she had business at the charity organization where she volunteered. That was the last time I saw her alive. That evening, the police called. They found her car drifting in the Hudson River. The door was open, but she was gone. A week later, her body was discovered 20 miles downstream. There were no signs of assault, no trace of poison. The official report said it was an accident, but I never believed that. Angela never went near water. She had been afraid of rivers since she was a child. And more than that, in the weeks before she died, she was different. Nervous, always checking her phone, sometimes looking at me as if she were hiding something. Rachel sat in silence. As a child, Angela had been the same, always sensing danger before anyone else. Dominic went on. A few days after she died, I found a copy of a file from an organization called Hope Future. She used to volunteer there. There was a list of names, most of them children, each with a code, a birth date, and a status. At the bottom, written in blue ink, was a single line: "If I do not come back, find Rachel." Dominic's eyes locked on hers. "You were the only name on that list I could not find. Every record about you was empty. No address, no adoption papers, nothing. It was as if you disappeared after the age of 10. Rachel felt her throat go dry. After leaving Santa Clarita, she had been adopted by a childless couple, taken far away, given a new name, a new school, a new life. She had tried to forget the past, convincing herself that maybe Angela had forgotten her too. But now she knew that Angela had never stopped searching. The scar on her wrist was no longer a childish symbol of friendship. It was a mark of something hidden, a secret bound by blood. A message left behind by someone who had crossed into silence but meant for her to hear it. Rachel took a deep breath. "You found me," she said softly. "What happens now?" Dominic did not answer right away. His gaze darkened, yet in it glimmered a faint spark of hope. "Now," he said quietly, "we find out why Angela died. And if what I suspect is true, you need to prepare yourself, because we may be facing something much larger than the past. We may be uncovering a part of the truth that someone has tried to bury forever." Dominic led Rachel out of the bar after the rain had eased. They walked together toward a black car parked along the curb. Neither spoke for several minutes. New York at night was still alive with noise and motion, yet at that corner, the world seemed unnaturally still. Dominic drove through the slick streets, headlights glinting off puddles, until he turned into a private garage beneath a tall building on the Upper West Side. He brought Rachel up to a spacious apartment, elegant but not ostentatious, where every object was in its place, precise, almost sterile, mirroring the guarded man who had just stepped into her life. Dominic told her to sit and disappeared into another room, returning with a dark wooden box that looked heavy with time. He placed it on the table, lifted the lid, and pushed it toward her. Inside lay folders, photographs, notebooks, flash drives, and a few of Angela's personal belongings, the fragments of a life preserved by a man who could not let go. "If you are really Angela's Rachel," he said quietly, "then you need to know how she lived her final years." Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she brushed the edge of the box and began leafing through its contents. There were photographs of Angela during charity trips, standing beside children in rural towns, unsent letters, half-finished journal entries written in blue ink. Each page peeled back a version of her friend she had never known, a woman both gentle and fierce, alive in ways Rachel had not imagined. Angela had worked for an organization called Hope Future, which claimed to help disadvantaged children, but the deeper Rachel read, the more unease crept up her spine. On a yellow page pinned inside the journal, Angela's handwriting appeared sharp and urgent. "None of this is random. The missing children are being erased from the system. There is a network behind it. I believe they are being sold overseas. Need proof." Rachel turned to Dominic, her voice rough. "Did she ever tell you any of this?" Dominic shook his head. "She mentioned suspicions once. Said she thought the organization was laundering money and misusing donations, but I never imagined it went this far. When she died, I thought it was an accident. Then I found this box hidden behind a drawer in her office." He pointed to a black and white photo. In it, an older man in a suit was shaking hands with a public official at what looked like a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The caption, scrawled in red ink, read, "Victor Manzoni, former director of Santa Clarita Orphanage." Rachel froze. That name, that face, that voice, every part of it was carved into her memory. He was the ghost in every nightmare she and Angela had shared as children, the man every orphan feared but never spoke about. Dominic went on. "Angela told me she suspected Manzoni was not only abusing his power, but was the link behind a trafficking network. She had been investigating him for 2 years, collecting evidence, recording conversations, tracking financial accounts. She even planted a recorder in his office during a conference in Chicago. "Where is the data now?" Rachel asked. Dominic sighed. "Some of it is on this flash drive," he said, lifting a small metal stick. "The rest, I do not know. The police claimed they found nothing of value in her car or her phone. I believe someone took it." Rachel sat in silence. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest, not just for Angela's death, but for the realization that her gentle friend, the girl who once whispered fairy tales at night, had grown into a woman brave enough to face the darkness alone. She had fought quietly, without help, without protection, and in the end, she had died with her truth buried. Rachel looked at Dominic, her voice unsteady. "Do you have anything else of hers?" Dominic opened a drawer and retrieved a smaller wooden box. Inside lay a pale blue notebook, its corners worn and soft. "This was her last one," he said. The final entry was written 2 days before she died. The last line was incomplete. "If I disappear, find Rachel Monroe. She will know what to do." Rachel closed her eyes for a long moment. She did not know what to do. But she knew one thing: she could not turn away. Not when Angela had trusted her so completely. Perhaps she was the only one left who could finish what Angela began. Dominic rose, his voice low and deliberate. "You can go home. Pretend you never knew any of this. Or you can stay and help me uncover the truth. The choice is yours." Rachel met his gaze. The eyes that once belonged to a weary veterinarian now burned with something fierce and awake. "I will stay," she said softly. "For Angela, and for the children she never got to save." When Rachel spoke those words, the air inside the apartment seemed to shift. The unfamiliar chill that had filled the room gave way to something denser, charged with quiet resolve. Dominic looked at her for a long time, as though needing to be certain she truly understood what she was stepping into. Then he nodded slowly and turned toward his office. Rachel stayed seated, her hand resting on Angela's final notebook, her mind tangled with fragments of memory and half-formed possibilities. A part of her wanted to stand up, leave this place, and return to the calm life she had built with her young son, but another voice deeper and stronger told her she had already crossed the point of no return. A few minutes later, Dominic returned with a thick file and a locked phone that opened with a fingerprint. He handed them to her, explaining that it was one of the devices Angela had used to store encrypted notes. Rachel opened the file and scanned the first few pages. There were handwritten notes, diagrams linking organizations, photographs of men in suits with names scrawled beneath them. Some were unfamiliar, but one name made her hand freeze: Victor Manzoni, former director of the Santa Clarita Orphanage. The man with eyes as cold as steel, the one who had haunted her dreams since childhood. Dominic sat across from her, arms folded, his voice low and deliberate, each word landing with the weight of something long carried in silence. "After Angela died, I wasn't just grieving," he said. "I felt I owed her an explanation, so I hired someone to investigate. One of them was a retired cop, with contacts inside the bureau. They discovered financial irregularities linking several charity foundations to a chain of shell companies under Manzoni's name. These companies funded orphanages around the country, but in truth served as fronts to transfer children overseas or to destinations no one could trace." A cold current ran through Rachel's body. She remembered the vacant eyes of a little girl from the orphanage, the one who had vanished overnight, unmentioned, unsearched for. Dominic continued. "What troubles me most is that Manzoni wasn't acting alone. He had protection, a network of people with power. That's why Angela kept everything secret. She didn't want me, or anyone else, caught in it." Rachel's voice wavered. "Do you think I'm in danger?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He rose, walked to the door, and turned a key in the lock. Then he pressed a button on a small control panel nearby. A soft mechanical sound filled the apartment as the front door locked automatically, the blinds descended, and the security system activated. He turned back to her, his tone steady but grave. "From this moment on, you shouldn't leave here without me." Rachel instinctively stepped back, her eyes widening. "Are you keeping me here?" Dominic nodded without hesitation. "I don't want you to be in danger, and I don't know who's watching you. If Angela wrote your name in her last journal before she died, it means they know about you too." Rachel clenched her hands, unease spreading through her chest. She was not used to confinement, nor to anyone trying to control her. But there was no menace in Dominic's eyes, only genuine concern. He went on. "I have another apartment, more secure, off the grid. If you agree, I'll take you there. For now, we need to retrace what Angela uncovered." Rachel hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. Not because she trusted Dominic completely, but because instinct told her that what was unfolding was far beyond what she could handle alone. If Angela had died for this, it could not be ignored. Dominic handed her a new phone. He told her it was fitted with a locator, in case he needed to find her quickly. Rachel accepted it, her thoughts spinning. She was, in every literal sense, being kept inside. But somewhere deeper, she knew she was not being forced to stay. She was the one who had chosen to. And when the door sealed shut behind them, Rachel understood that from this moment on, every way out was gone. There was no returning to the quiet life she had before. Not when Angela was dead. Not when the voices of the children they once knew might still be calling out from the silence. The next morning, Rachel woke in the unfamiliar apartment Dominic had brought her to just before dawn. It was a world apart from the heavy, watchful atmosphere of his main residence. This place was tucked deep within a secluded complex on the northern edge of the city, its walls soundproofed, its security system automated, its furnishings simple yet precise. Nothing inside bore any sign of who lived there, as if the space itself had been stripped of identity. Rachel sat for a long while on the sofa, gazing through the misted window, where pale light pressed against the glass. The silence was thick, the kind that carried its own pulse. In her mind, Dominic's voice from the night before still echoed with a weight that refused to fade. "People have died for knowing too much," he had said quietly. "And if Angela left your name behind as her final safeguard, then whoever orchestrated all of this will not overlook that clue." It was a little past 9 when Dominic returned, carrying a large canvas bag filled with documents. He set it down on the table, unzipped it, and began to pull out stacks of old, yellowing folders, their corners curled with age. Most were copies salvaged from the long-forgotten archives of the Illinois Department of Family Services, records abandoned after the Santa Clarita orphanage was officially dissolved more than 20 years ago. Dominic explained that it had taken months of searching and a small fortune to gather even these fragments. Rachel sat beside him, her heart pounding as she recognized the faded logo of the orphanage printed in the upper corner of each page. Names she had never heard appeared one after another, but among them were a few that struck her like distant echoes, the faces of children she had once eaten with in the cafeteria, played with in the cracked concrete yard, or watched vanish overnight without a word. Angela Dubois, the record read, admitted at age 6, no known relatives, the only personal possession a broken heart-shaped pendant. Rachel Monroe, admitted the same year, original file missing due to system error. Beneath that, scrawled faintly in red ink, was a note so small it could have been overlooked. Pair exhibits exceptional bond. Ongoing observation required. Rachel swallowed hard. She had never known they were being watched, catalogued as something worth noting. She flipped through more pages, and slowly a grim pattern began to take shape. Nearly 20 children had been recorded as leaving the orphanage within 3 years, yet only 7 had complete adoption paperwork. The remaining 13 were marked as transferred, lost documentation, or pending. None listed the name of a receiving home, no organization, no signature of handover. Dominic pointed to a handwritten list Angela had once compiled on a loose sheet of paper. Each name was underlined in violet ink, with small initials written beside them, V, M, and H, F. Dominic explained softly that VM stood for Victor Manzoni, while H, F meant Hope Future. Angela had believed that some of the children taken from the orphanage were not adopted at all, but redirected for darker purposes. Rachel shut her eyes, anger rising through her chest like heat. She remembered a little girl named Leah, who always gave her half her pudding every Friday night. One evening, Leah's bed was empty, her blanket neatly folded. The caretakers had said she'd been adopted by a family from another state. But here, in Angela's list, Leah's name sat between 2 others, marked in red ink, missing. No file, no contact. Rachel's hands trembled. Dominic said nothing, letting her confront each truth as it surfaced. Then she stopped at a file that had been wedged at the bottom of the bag, a blurred photocopy of the orphanage's internal roster from its final year. On the right-hand column was a strange symbol, a circle with a diagonal slash through it. Dominic explained that Angela believed it designated a group of children marked for special transfer. No one knew what that phrase truly meant, but nearly every name bearing the mark had vanished completely from the state's records. Rachel closed the folder, feeling as though she had stepped one layer deeper into the nightmare Angela had once faced alone. But she was not alone now. Dominic sat beside her, his gaze steady, protective but not imposing. He handed her one last file, thin and fragile. Inside was a short statement from a former employee of Santa Clarita, a man who had worked there during its final years. In it, He admitted being ordered to rewrite adoption records for multiple children and destroy the originals, altering birth dates, names, even photographs to erase their identities. Rachel said nothing. She rose quietly and walked out onto the balcony. The winter wind tore through her hair, the cold slicing her skin, but she barely felt it. She stared down at the sprawling city below, as though searching for something hidden in its vastness. When she turned back to Dominic, her voice was hoarse but steady. "We have to find out which of them are still alive, and if any of them need help, we can't let them disappear again." Dominic nodded, as if he had been waiting for that moment. And in that silence, a vow was forged between them, one that required no words. A new promise, born from the ashes of an old scar, binding their fates to the truth that neither could walk away from now. In the dim wash of afternoon light stretching across the window, Rachel sat on the living room floor surrounded by scattered folders that looked like fragments of a torn memory. From the other room, Dominic's low voice murmured into the phone, while in her hands she held the two halves of Angela's heart-shaped pendant, one that had rested against Angela's chest for years, and the other that had never left Rachel's own neck. Those two small pieces of metal, once silent for decades, seemed to hum softly now, as though recognizing each other after a lifetime apart. They were more than keepsakes. They were echoes of two souls separated too early, now stirring something deeper than grief. Rachel's gaze fixed on the pendant as her mind slipped backward, drifting into the winter that had shaped them both. It was the winter at Santa Clarita, the year the snow fell so heavily it blurred the windows for days on end. Two little girls, one with golden hair, the other with dark chestnut curls, huddled beneath a blanket after lights out, whispering to each other in the dark. That night had followed the sudden disappearance of another child in their room, taken away without explanation. Rachel had been only 8. Angela had just turned 9. Fear wrapped around them like frost, and they clung to each other, fragile sprouts trembling in the storm. Then Angela whispered her daring idea. "If one day we are taken away, let's leave a sign, so that when we meet again, we will know it's us." Rachel could still remember the sting of the needle's tip piercing her skin. Angela bit her lip, cheeks flushed from the pain, but she did not cry. Then it was Rachel's turn. Together they traced 2 intertwined letters, R and A, in fresh blood on their left wrists, and wrapped them carefully in cotton as if protecting a treasure. Angela had then broken a small heart-shaped pendant she had stolen from a donation bag and handed Rachel one half, saying with that fierce, steady voice of hers, "If you keep this, and if the scar stays, then no matter where we are in the world, we will find each other again." Rachel had believed her, with the pure, desperate faith of a child who had never known what family felt like. And now, as the two halves of the pendant lay reunited, as the old scar on Dominic's wrist had revealed itself not as coincidence but as connection, the vow made all those years ago rose again like a forgotten song carried back on the wind. Dominic stepped out from the study, his expression softening when he saw Rachel sitting still amid the wreckage of old files and resurfaced memories. He sat beside her without a word. Rachel held out both halves of the pendant. Dominic took them, fitted them together, and exhaled slowly. "I used to think this was just some trinket she kept for sentimental reasons," he said quietly. "But now I understand. Angela believed you would come back one day, and she was right." Rachel looked at him, and for the first time since their paths had crossed, she felt something take root between them that had nothing to do with loss or anger. It was not love, nor salvation, but an unspoken recognition that they were now bound by the same weight, the same unfinished story that had begun long before either of them knew who they truly were. She began to tell him more about their childhood in the orphanage, about how Angela had always stood up for the smaller children, how she had hidden cookies in her shirt so Rachel would have something to eat when punished, how once they had both been locked in the storage room for fighting a caretaker who had struck another child. Angela had always said, "If we don't speak up, no one will. And if we break our promises, then words mean nothing." Dominic listened silently, his eyes occasionally glinting with something like regret, as though each detail was another piece falling into place in the puzzle of the woman he had loved and lost. To him, Angela was no longer only the wife he had buried, but also the brave little girl who had once sworn an eternal promise in the dark, Rachel's sister in everything but blood, bound to her by pain, courage, and the kind of love that never needed words. As darkness settled fully over the city, Rachel returned to the balcony, holding the two halves of Angela's pendant now joined as one in her hands. She whispered softly, unsure if she was speaking to herself or to Angela, "You kept your promise. I will keep mine too. No matter the truth, no matter who we must face, I will not step back, because we are sisters of blood, forever." Dominic stood quietly behind her, saying nothing. He simply laid a hand lightly on her shoulder, a silent gesture of companionship that needed no vow. In that quiet, the blood oath made decades ago seemed to ignite once more, a smoldering flame that would guide them through the storms ahead. 2 days later, Dominic received a brief call from an old contact, someone who had once worked in the state's property record system. Among the anonymous assets registered under a subsidiary of Hope Future, there was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Newark, New Jersey, one Angela had cryptically mentioned in her notes as the place where original documents she had yet to transfer might be hidden. Rachel's chest tightened as she heard this. She could not tell if she feared what they might find inside, or feared finding nothing at all. But if Angela had been there, they had to go. The next morning, before dawn, Dominic drove Rachel out of the safe apartment, crossing the George Washington Bridge and following the gray, industrial streets that rose like black steel smoke columns from the ground. The warehouse lay tucked among a row of abandoned buildings, unmarked, without cameras, its single metal door rusted and unyielding from years of neglect. Dominic stopped the car several hundred feet away, turned off the engine, and surveyed the area. Not a soul in sight. They stepped out, moving deliberately toward the structure as though crossing into forbidden ground. Rachel inhaled deeply, the scent of cold wind mixed with rotting wood and rust filling her lungs, a smell that haunted those who had once lingered among forgotten memories. The warehouse door was secured with an old iron lock, but Dominic had it open within minutes, using a set of specialized tools he had brought. Inside, darkness swallowed the space, pierced only by faint streaks of light filtering through a gap in the roof, forming pale beams that seemed like wandering fragments of memory. Rachel held her breath as she stepped inside, fingers tightening instinctively around the small flashlight in her hand. Dust-coated wooden shelves towered above them, cardboard boxes scattered haphazardly. Yet there was no sign of vandalism. Everything seemed frozen, as if time had stopped years ago. Dominic led the way, his flashlight sweeping across labels and faded handwriting. Rachel followed, eyes tracing every blurred line, absorbing each detail. Eventually, they stopped at a low shelf tucked into the far corner. A cardboard box bore a handwritten label in blue ink that made Rachel pause. The words were simple, yet profoundly familiar. Angela D. Internal notes. Dominic opened the box, revealing dozens of envelopes, documents, copies of Santa Clarita orphanage records, medical reports, photographs of children who had vanished, numbered tapes, and a thick black notebook densely filled with Angela's handwriting. Rachel picked up a sheet of paper, her chest tightening at the sight of Leah and the other children she had once lived alongside. On the back, Angela had recorded the precise day each child disappeared, who was responsible that day, the time they were removed from the system, and the supervising staff member. Each line felt like a blade against her mind. Stories she had thought long buried now re-emerged with brutal clarity. In another folder, Dominic found a copy of a contract between Hope Future and an overseas organization identified by a French abbreviation. The document specified monetary amounts assigned per child transferred under the guise of humanitarian relocation, yet no destination or tracking records were provided. Rachel trembled. She picked up another photograph Angela at a conference, Victor Manzoni standing behind her. In the accompanying notebook, Angela had noted that day she had snuck into his office to plant a recorder. She captured a fragment of a conversation between Manzoni and a man referred to as Mr. C. Dominic quickly switched on the old recording device. The battery was weak, yet it still emitted a faint static as Manzoni's unmistakable voice echoed through the warehouse. If the children have no papers, if no one claims them, then they are numbers. And numbers are easier to transfer than people. A chill ran through Rachel's spine. Dominic switched off the recorder, squeezing her hand tightly. This was the proof Angela had risked everything to uncover. Tangible evidence of a system built to legalize human trafficking beneath the guise of legality. Rachel opened the black notebook. On the first page, in blue ink, she immediately recognized Angela's handwriting. If I disappear, it means I've come too close to the truth. But if someone finds this book, there is still hope. Keep going. Rachel closed her eyes, tears spilling not from weakness, but from the sudden clarity that Angela had never given up. She had only been delayed. Now, with the secret laid bare, with the warehouse unlocked, the real journey for justice had begun. Dominic stood beside her, hand resting on her shoulder. No words were needed. They both understood they would not stop, not while the truth remained buried in darkness, as silent as the warehouse around them. When Rachel and Dominic left the warehouse in Newark, their hands carried what remained of the truth fragments of evidence Angela had risked and ultimately lost her life to gather. The wind swept fiercely through the rows of derelict buildings, lifting dust and scraps of paper into the air, whispering like the restless breath of a past that refused to stay buried. Dominic drove in silence the entire way back, his face set and unreadable, while Rachel sat motionless beside him, her eyes fixed on the black notebook resting on her lap. She turned its pages one by one, afraid that if she waited even a moment, the words Angela had left behind might somehow vanish forever. Inside were brief journal entries, rough sketches of routes, travel schedules of key figures in the trafficking network, and hurried scrawls that looked as though they had been written by someone constantly looking over her shoulder. When they reached the safe apartment, Dominic immediately checked the security system before leading Rachel inside. She hardly seemed to notice. Dropping into the chair, she kept reading, the black notebook trembling slightly in her hands. Near the end, tucked between 2 pages, was a small black memory card, unmarked and unnumbered. Rachel lifted it carefully, her fingers trembling. Dominic noticed and brought over his encrypted laptop. It took only a few seconds to open the single file hidden within. A video appeared, less than 3 minutes long. Angela's face filled the dim screen, blurred and grainy, as though the recording had been made in haste from a small room with a desk lamp glowing faintly behind her. But her eyes, those eyes were unmistakable, deep, steady, and filled with love. She looked straight into the camera, her voice soft but clear. "If you're watching this, Rachel, then I probably didn't make it back. Don't cry, please. Because I know you're still alive, and as long as one person who knows the truth is alive, the truth still has hope. You don't owe me anything, but if you still remember our promise, then listen to me." Angela paused, swallowing hard as if holding back tears. "I discovered that part of this network began right at Santa Clarita, the place where we grew up. They chose children with no family, no one to look for them, forged their records, and sent them abroad under fake adoption programs. Those children never came back, and no one asked, no one remembered. But I did. I kept the files, the recordings, and the names of those behind it. I know this might kill me, but if I don't do it, no one will. I need you, Rachel. I need you to finish this. I don't trust anyone else. If Dominic is with you, you can trust him. He's not perfect, but he never gave up on me, even when I was gone." Her voice trembled as she bowed her head. "You're the only family I have left. I've always waited for the day you'd come back, even just once. And if this is the only time you ever hear me, then listen with your heart. I love you, and I know you'll do what's right." The screen went dark. The final sound was a faint, weary breath, and then silence, as though the air itself had vanished from the room. Rachel sat frozen, tears sliding down her cheeks without her noticing. Dominic stepped closer, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, the lights of the city shimmered indifferently against the glass, their glow distant and cold. Yet within that small apartment, Angela's final message had come alive, not as an ending, but as a beginning. She was gone, but her voice remained, carrying the weight of a call, a command, and a sliver of hope. Rachel wiped her face, her voice trembling yet resolute. "We won't let her die for nothing." Dominic nodded, his gaze calm but bright. Angela had done the hardest part. Now it was their turn to continue. And this time, no one would be left behind. That night, Rachel could not sleep. After watching Angela's final message, every layer of memory she thought had long since turned to ash stirred awake, clamoring at the edges of her mind. She sat by the window, staring at the faint yellow glow spilling from an apartment across the street, and drifted back to the nights when 2 little girls lay side by side on a rickety bunk bed in Santa Clarita. Angela had always been the one to hold her when the nightmares came, always the one to step between her and anyone who tried to hurt her. Then, when the orphanage closed, Angela had been sent away, and Rachel had been taken in by a couple who adopted her in haste, as though someone wanted to erase every trace of the past. She grew up under a new name, in a new city, trying to convince herself those years had been nothing more than a strange dream from childhood. She never thought of going back, never believed Angela might still be looking for her. Not until now, when every piece of evidence proved that Angela had never stopped. It was she, Rachel, who had become the forgotten sister. By morning, Dominic had already made coffee. He placed the cup beside her without a word, sensing she needed quiet more than comfort. But Rachel finally lifted her head, her voice rough, yet steady. "I want to go back to Santa Clarita." Dominic frowned, asking if she was sure. The orphanage had been shut down for years, he reminded her. Nothing left but ruins. But Rachel nodded. "I need to see it myself. If Angela left something behind, it might still be there." Dominic hesitated for a moment, then agreed. He would prepare the car and whatever equipment they might need. They set out at midday, the road stretching for more than 300 miles under a sky bleached pale with winter light. The air between them felt taut, almost humming with what neither dared to say. The landscape shifted gradually from city gray to lonely countryside until, at last, a rusted sign emerged from the overgrowth, its paint flaking into unreadable ghosts of letters. Santa Clarita Orphanage. The iron gate still stood, lock long broken, grass grown to knee-height. Dominic parked behind a line of trees, and together they pushed through the weeds into what was once a playground of laughter and noise. Time had not erased the place. The empty yard still held a broken swing hanging crooked from its chain. The main building's windows were shattered, the walls peeled and bruised by weather. Rachel walked slowly, each step landing on the fragile crust of memory. She led Dominic to the dormitory where she and Angela had slept. The room was stripped bare now, just a collapsed bed frame, a patchwork of stains on the wall. She reached toward the headboard, her fingers finding the faint scratches of 2 names carved long ago with a rusted nail. They were still there, uneven, trembling, but still there. Rachel began to cry, her body shaking with the weight of years. She turned to Dominic, her voice breaking. "I forgot her. All these years, I lived as if she never existed." Dominic said nothing. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You didn't forget," he said softly. "You just had to keep living. No one can blame you for surviving. Angela fought so you could do that. And now you've come back. That's enough." They searched the rest of the building, room by room, finding only the decay of time until Rachel stopped before what had once been the administrative office. The door was rotten, hanging crooked, but inside, beneath a pile of broken furniture, stood an old metal filing cabinet. Dominic used a crowbar to clear the debris. Most of the files inside were damp and moldy, their pages stuck together, but at the very back, wedged under the lowest drawer, was a large envelope sealed and yellowed with age. On the front, written in fading ink, were the words, "For Rachel Monroe." Rachel's hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a short letter and a rough hand-drawn map of the orphanage, marked with an X beneath the tiled floor of the old infirmary, the very room where she and Angela had once been locked overnight as children. Angela had hidden something there, something only Rachel could find. On the drive back, Rachel said nothing. She stared out the window, her eyes red from tears, yet her gaze had changed. She was no longer the forgotten sister. She was the one Angela had trusted until her last breath, and now, she would not let the world forget Angela ever again. Not while the truth waited to be unearthed. Not while there were still children like them, trapped somewhere in the dark, waiting to be saved. When Rachel returned from Santa Clarita, she was no longer the woman haunted solely by the pain of the past. She was a living piece of the puzzle Angela had left behind, slowly fitting together the last fragments of a story unfinished. In her hands was the map leading to an underground room hidden beneath the old infirmary, the place that had once been the setting of her childhood fears. But before they could return there, Dominic insisted they go into hiding for a few days. He brought her to a small wooden cabin by a quiet lake on the northern outskirts of the city, surrounded by dense forest and the rustling whisper of wind through the leaves. There, for the first time, Rachel decided to call Emily, Angela's daughter, the girl she had heard Dominic mention but had never met. Emily was 17, in her final year of high school, living with her grandmother since Angela's death, completely unaware of the secret life her mother had led. The phone call was strained from the start. When Rachel introduced herself, there was a long silence on the other end. But eventually, Emily agreed to meet. The meeting took place at a small cafe near her school, where the hiss and hum of the espresso machine softened the tension between them. Emily was strikingly like Angela, with the same defiant eyes shadowed by quiet sorrow. Rachel slid across the table a copy of Angela's final letter and the video message that had been recorded before her disappearance. When the grainy images flickered onto the phone screen, Emily's hands began to tremble. She tried to hold back tears, but by the time Angela's voice said she trusted only Rachel and wanted her daughter protected at all costs, Emily broke. She stood up abruptly, her voice cracking with grief. "Why are you only coming now? Why did my mother have to die alone while you were still alive?" Rachel didn't respond to the anger. She understood it too well, because she had once blamed herself with the same bitterness. She sat quietly, letting Emily spill every word of her pain before speaking softly. "Because I didn't know. Because I lived too long pretending to forget. But I'm here now to tell you what your mother did, how she fought, and that she never stopped thinking of you, even in her last days." Emily fell silent. The fury faded from her face, replaced by the hollow, stunned look of someone who had just felt the ground shift beneath her life. That night, Rachel brought Emily back to the cabin. Dominic was surprised to see her, but he didn't object. Instead, he made tea for the three of them, and sat quietly, while Rachel recounted everything they had discovered. Emily listened without blinking, her face pale, her hands tightening around the cup as if to anchor herself to something solid. When Rachel showed her the heart-shaped pendant, two halves reunited after decades, Emily's expression shifted. It was as though every bedtime story her mother had ever told had suddenly become real, and far more terrifying than she could have imagined. Her voice was barely a whisper. So my mother was someone entirely different from who I thought she was. Rachel nodded, her tone low and steady. Yes, but she was the bravest person I've ever known. She gave up everything so that you could grow up in peace. Emily sat still for a long time, her eyes distant. Then, without warning, she stood and disappeared into the small bedroom. A few moments later, she returned carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a bundle of old letters, the paper yellowed at the edges. She explained that they were letters her mother had kept for years, all from a single anonymous sender who had written to Angela from different places around the world. When Rachel picked them up, her breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakably that of a child. Each letter spoke of a new life, a new country, a word of thanks for being given a second chance. The names signed at the bottom were different each time, but at the end of every letter was the same small symbol, two letters, R and A, interlocked in shaky, childish strokes. Rachel sat motionless, her throat tightening. Angela had found some of the children. She had saved them, but she had told no one. She had never taken credit, never asked to be remembered. Emily pressed the letters against her chest, tears spilling freely. For the first time, she saw her mother not as the quiet woman who used to read by the kitchen window, but as a silent warrior who had fought against a world that would rather not see. A mother who had traded her safety for her daughter's peace. And though Emily's world had just shattered, something new was beginning to form within her, a fragile, fierce faith. She looked up at Rachel, and for the first time, her eyes carried trust. She didn't know how she could help, or what strength she had to offer, but she knew she wanted to stand beside them, for her mother, for the truth, and for the children who never had the chance to write their letters of thanks. The next morning, when the lake was still veiled in mist and the pines beyond swayed gently in the first whisper of wind, Rachel stepped out onto the porch with a cup of hot coffee in her hands. She hadn't slept much, but for the first time in many days, she didn't feel alone. Inside, Emily was still fast asleep in the small bedroom, clutching the bundle of letters her mother had once received as if they were the last remnants of Angela's warmth. Dominic was in the kitchen making another pot of coffee, though Rachel knew he was watching her quietly through the glass door. She took a slow sip, her eyes lifting to the hazy sky before she turned back inside. She could feel it now, the sense that she was close, achingly close, to whatever Angela had wanted her to find. But she also understood something else. The truth they were chasing could no longer belong to her alone. It had to be brought into the light, for all those who had once been forgotten. The map Angela had left marked a small area near the old infirmary at Santa Clarita, the same room where the sisters had been locked as children. By noon, the three of them were on their way back. Dominic carried the metal detector and flashlights. Emily held the map. Rachel brought the heart-shaped pendant, as if it might lead them where they needed to go. The orphanage was quieter than ever, sunlight slanting through broken windows, dust swirling in the air like ghostly fog. When they reached the infirmary, Rachel stood still for a long time before the cracked tiles, as though she could hear her own footsteps from decades ago echoing back from the walls. Emily whispered, her voice almost afraid to disturb the silence. "Mom once said this room was always cold, but she never told me why." Dominic swept the detector slowly over the floor until a faint beeping broke the stillness. Kneeling down, he pried up the tiles one by one with a crowbar. Beneath them was a narrow hatch sealed by an old sheet of rusted metal. When he pulled it open, damp air rose up from below, forcing them to step back. He shone his flashlight down the narrow passage. A ladder of iron rungs led into darkness. Rachel went first. She descended carefully, her palms grazing the slick walls, every sound magnified by the hollow stone around her. When she reached the bottom, she turned on her flashlight and froze. The small room, barely a few yards wide, was Angela's hidden sanctuary, the place where she had safeguarded everything that mattered. A simple wooden cabinet stood against the wall. Photographs were taped to the damp stone, some faded, some barely legible. Stacks of papers wrapped in plastic were piled neatly on a table, and in the center rested a wooden chest, carved with the intertwined letters R and A. Rachel lifted the lid. Inside was the complete record of the missing children from Santa Clarita and other orphanages, Names, dates, financial documents, contracts, letters, photographs, and Angela's handwritten journals covering 7 years of her investigation. At the back, slipped between the final pages, was a letter addressed to Emily. The handwriting was steady, unmistakably Angela's. Asterisk. If you have found this, my darling girl, then I am probably gone. But I believe you will grow strong enough to face the truth and carry it forward. And if Rachel is with you, then I can rest easy. She will not let you fall. She is the family I chose, and she is yours too. Asterisk. Emily didn't cry. She only pressed the letter against her chest and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Dominic brushed the dust off a photo frame leaning in the corner. Inside was a single, time-worn picture, Angela, Rachel, and several other children, smiling with the innocence of those who didn't yet know how dark the world could be. Rachel took the photo in her hands and felt something inside her finally begin to melt. It wasn't sorrow this time, it was release. After all these years, she was home again, not just with Angela, but with the part of herself she had buried long ago, and with the unshakable belief that nothing they had endured had been in vain. They left the hidden room as dusk settled over the orphanage. Dominic locked the hatch behind them, but Rachel did not take everything. She left a copy of Angela's list and her letter, along with a hastily scrawled note. Asterisk. If you find this place, do not remain silent. The truth does not deserve to be buried. Asterisk. Emily held Rachel's hand as they walked back, no words needed. In that quiet moment, among 3 souls who had once been lost in the dark turns of fate, a reunion had taken place not through blood, but through trust, tears, and a promise that no one would be forgotten again. 3 days after the reunion in the underground room beneath Santa Clarita, Rachel, Dominic, and Emily began crafting a plan to bring the truth to light. The documents found in the wooden chest Angela had left were crucial evidence, yet Dominic knew it was not enough to dismantle a system that had endured for decades. They needed more direct proof, someone on the inside to reveal themselves, and they needed to do it in a place where the powerful would appear the most untouchable. The annual Gala of Hope Future, attended by high-ranking officials, foundation leaders, and wealthy patrons from across the globe. This year, Victor Manzoni himself would be the guest of honor, scheduled to give a speech on the organization's commitment to protecting orphaned children worldwide. Just the thought sent a chill down Rachel's spine. But this time, they would not be attending to applaud or donate. They were there to expose. Dominic mapped out every detail meticulously. He contacted Carla Simmons, an investigative journalist who had previously pursued human trafficking cases, but had been silenced due to lack of evidence. Carla agreed immediately after reviewing part of the documents Rachel carried. She would pose as an event photographer, capturing everything, and be ready to broadcast Angela's recordings along with Manzoni's confession at the precise moment. Rachel forbade Emily from attending directly, but the girl insisted on being involved. In the end, Dominic allowed her to come, but only to remain inside a surveillance vehicle outside, where Carla would transmit live video and audio. The gala took place in a 5-star hotel in downtown Manhattan. It was a crisp autumn evening, the city sparkling with lights, yet beneath the glittering surface lay layers of deceit and hidden corruption. Rachel wore a sleek black dress, her hair neatly tied back, her gaze steely and unwavering. Dominic walked beside her, calm and composed, but his eyes betrayed a constant vigilance. As they entered the grand ballroom, the crystal chandeliers fractured the light into hundreds of glints across gowns, tuxedos, and social smiles. No one recognized them. No one suspected that among the distinguished guests, a storm had quietly arrived. Carla was ready. The camera was concealed within her camera strap, the small microphone tucked beneath her glasses. Dominic guided Rachel through the room, greeting a few familiar faces to avoid suspicion. They waited for the precise moment Victor Manzoni would step onto the stage. When he appeared, the room fell into a hush. He took the podium with a confident smile, his voice resonating through the speakers, speaking of social responsibility and the importance of protecting children with no one to care for them. Rachel clenched her hands until her knuckles turned white. Dominic nodded subtly at Carla, who signaled that she had captured both his face and the entire speech. As Manzoni prepared to close with an emotional appeal, Rachel stepped forward. She stood in the spotlight, her voice clear and strong. "Mr. Manzoni, do you remember Angela Davis?" He froze, blinking rapidly. Murmurs spread through the room. Dominic joined her at her side. She continued, "Angela worked for this organization. She died uncovering the truth. And I am here to tell the part that has remained hidden." Carla activated the live feed. On the large screen behind the podium, the old recording Angela had made began to play. Manzoni's voice echoed, chilling in its clarity. If these children have no papers, if no one claims them, then they are numbers. And numbers are easier to move than people. The ballroom fell silent. Some guests shouted. Others rose and left. Official cameras began recording. Security moved to intervene, but it was too late. Everything was streaming live across social media. Emily, watching from the surveillance vehicle outside, broke down as she saw her mother finally named and remembered in a place where she should have been honored long ago. Rachel, standing beneath the spotlight, remained still, not burning with anger, but with the fire of justice. What was meant to be an evening of celebration and philanthropy had turned into a scene of revelation, a trap, and the most powerful had walked right into it. The chaos that followed spread faster than either Rachel or Dominic had anticipated. By nightfall, Angela's recording circulated across social media, appearing on morning news, and Victor Manzoni was transformed from a respected philanthropist into a man suspected by the nation. Less than 24 hours later, he vanished. No police could find him. No border crossing recorded his movement. The Hope Future Network quickly shut down offices, disconnected phones, and erased all digital records. Dominic understood that this was the most dangerous stage yet. When those hidden in the shadows realized the truth had been exposed, the next step would be to silence those who knew. And the first target would not be the media, it would be Rachel. Over the next 3 days, the group had to keep moving between safe houses. Dominic set up secure locations across the city and instructed Carla to withdraw from her newsroom to ensure she remained unexposed. Emily was sent to the home of an old, trusted friend of Angela's in the Boston suburbs. Before leaving, she hugged Rachel tightly and whispered, "I'm not afraid, but I need to live so I can tell the rest of this story." Rachel smiled, sensing for the first time that Angela's presence still lingered in her daughter's determined eyes. After dropping Emily off, Rachel and Dominic returned to a temporary apartment on a high floor of an abandoned building in Brooklyn. The room was empty, the concrete walls cold, yet it was one of the few places they trusted no one could track. That night, as Dominic checked the lower floors, Rachel went to the bathroom to splash her face, trying to shake off exhaustion. The dim light reflected her own image back at her. She looked into her eyes, then her gaze fell to her left wrist. The scar was still there, faint but unmistakable. The intertwined letters R and A, the mark she and Angela had carved into their skin as children, a vow that would never fade. Rachel gently traced the scar and suddenly remembered something. She ran to her room, opened Angela's black notebook, and flipped quickly to the near final pages where Angela had written, "Asterisk, if they don't believe me, show them the scar. Only we have it. And only that scar can break the true seal." Asterisk. Rachel sat in stunned silence. All this time, she had thought the scar was merely a keepsake. Now she realized it was a key. She opened her laptop and pulled up Angela's map, the section she had never understood, a small circled mark near the old administrative office at Santa Clarita, a place they had never explored fully, having focused only on the underground room before. She donned her jacket and called Dominic. They had to return. He hesitated briefly, but when Rachel pointed to her scar and the journal entry, he nodded. They left the apartment under cover of night, crossing the bridge through thick fog. Santa Clarita seemed to slumber beneath a blanket of time, unaware that its dark past was about to be revealed. Rachel followed the map, leading Dominic to a small room behind the administrative area. The door was locked with a metal padlock, but there was no key. Dominic tried to break it with a tool, but it failed. Rachel bent down and noticed the lock had a double groove pattern etched on its surface identical to the shape of their scar. Instinctively, she drew a small knife and pricked her left wrist, letting a thin line of blood fall. She pressed it onto the lock. Dominic watched silently. A soft click sounded. The door swung open. Inside was a tiny space, barely enough for one person to stand. On the table lay a sealed metal box. Rachel opened it. Within were documents never seen anywhere else. Real names, photographs, addresses, and direct transaction records between orphanages, international organizations, and buyers from multiple countries. Most importantly, there was an unreleased video. Angela sat in a small room, pretending to discuss a new project with Victor Manzoni, unaware that a camera had been installed. In the footage, he admitted to optimizing orphan records, forging documents, and moving children through official channels under the guise of charity. Rachel held her breath as she watched to the end. Angela had risked everything to bring the truth to light. And now, with the scar revealed, with the final door opened, they held the one thing the perpetrators could not deny: the truth, etched into blood, flesh, and memory. No longer a story, but living evidence. Rachel clutched the box tightly. This time, no one would escape. And the scar, once a mark of pain, had become a symbol of the justice they were about to deliver to the forgotten souls. As Rachel and Dominic left Santa Clarita in the late sunset, they carried the metal box as if holding Angela's last beating heart in their hands. In the car, Rachel said nothing, her eyes glued to the laptop screen replaying the footage of Victor Manzoni speaking to Angela. Each replay revealed a new detail, a fleeting glance, a subtle nod, a phrase that could serve as evidence. Dominic drove tensely, knuckles white on the steering wheel, as though gripping the world itself to keep it on track. Returning to the Brooklyn apartment was impossible, far too dangerous. Dominic suggested they stop at an abandoned veterinary clinic left behind by an old friend, a former animal rescue center now shuttered. Hidden behind an old Queens neighborhood, with steel doors and its own electrical system, it would serve as a temporary refuge. That night, Rachel could not sleep. She organized the documents, copied the video onto 3 separate encrypted drives, and sent them through secure channels. One for Carla, one for the lawyer Dominic had worked with on international money laundering cases, and the final one hidden on a small drive Rachel wore around her neck. Dominic checked the security system again before resting in the adjacent room. Everything seemed under control until Rachel heard a noise behind the old pharmacy cabinets. Her heart pounded as she rose and crept into the hallway, feet frozen to the floor, glass shattered, a second sound, a hinge being forced. She bolted toward Dominic's room, but before she could knock, a figure dressed in black lunged from behind, covering her mouth and yanking her back. In that instant, survival instinct surged. Rachel bit down hard on the hand covering her mouth, forcing the attacker to release her, and screamed. Dominic leapt up, gun in hand, charging into the hallway. 2 more men appeared from the rear door, one wielding a silenced pistol. Dominic pulled Rachel back into the pharmacy room and locked the door from the inside, but they couldn't hold out for long. The walls were thin, the lock old, and the attackers were well armed. Rachel panted, clutching the metal box to her chest like a talisman. Dominic signaled for her to crawl out the back if he could draw their attention, but Rachel shook her head. "I'm not going if you don't go." Dominic gritted his teeth, torn between survival and protecting her. A gunshot rang out, the main door burst open, dust filling the air. Dominic pushed Rachel behind a filing cabinet and returned fire. The gunfire echoed through the clinic, shattering the last vestiges of the night's silence. In the chaos, Rachel crawled toward the back of the small kitchen. There, behind a stack of empty cages, was a narrow passage that once led to an alley, an old exit used years ago to move injured animals during emergencies. She shouted Dominic's name, but no answer came. Then a shadow loomed in front of her, not Dominic, but another man, unfamiliar, gun raised. Rachel didn't think. She grabbed a metal tray from the counter and hurled it at his face, the crash of steel echoing through the narrow room. She ran. Footsteps thundered behind her, splashing through shards of glass. She threw open the back door and burst into the rain-soaked alley, the cold night air slashing her lungs. Headlights flashed at the end of the alley. A van waited there, engine running. But before she could reach it, a deafening explosion erupted inside the clinic. Rachel turned, her heart seizing. Flames leapt from the windows, devouring the walls. She screamed Dominic's name into the blaze. For a moment there was nothing, then a figure staggered through the smoke, grabbing her before she could run back inside. It was Dominic, his face streaked with soot, shirt torn open across one shoulder. He gasped for breath and dragged her toward the van. They sped off into the night, sirens wailing in the distance behind them. Rachel clutched the hard drive to her chest, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Dominic hunched over the steering wheel, trembling, unable to speak. She looked at him, then back through the window at the orange glow receding behind them. The clinic, once their safe haven, was now a heap of burning ash. They had survived, but the rules had changed. The people they were fighting had drawn their line. From this moment forward, there would be no retreat. Blood had been spilled, and the truth was now surrounded by hands eager to bury it forever. The van tore through the darkness like an arrow fleeing hell. They didn't stop until the city was far behind them, until the skyline gave way to winding roads and pine forests near the Vermont border. Hidden among the trees, Dominic had a cabin he'd built years ago for moments when there was nowhere else to run. The house had no address, no phone signal, only dense woods and a quiet lake behind it. When they stepped inside, both were silent, their breaths ragged as if the echoes of gunfire still rang in their ears. Rachel sank to the floor beside the fireplace, her hands shaking as she unclasped the drive from around her neck. Dominic made one last circuit of the house, checked every window, bolted the doors, pulled the curtains, and placed his gun within arm's reach on the table. Then he sat across from her, exhaustion shadowing his face. Rachel looked up, her voice barely holding. "If you hadn't pulled me out, I'd be dead." Dominic was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "If you died, everything Angela fought for would die with you. I couldn't let that happen." They sat together in the dark, the flickering firelight painting faint gold across their faces. Rachel watched Dominic for a long time before she finally asked softly, "How long have you known Angela?" Dominic exhaled, his head resting against the back of the chair. "We met for the first time in Budapest," he said quietly. "Angela was deep inside a human trafficking network in Eastern Europe, and I was coordinating an international anti-money laundering operation. We crossed paths by accident, and from that moment on, we were never separate again." She had this way of making things feel right, even when we were standing in the filthiest corners of the world. Rachel tightened her hands in her lap. "I never knew she was that strong." Dominic smiled faintly, though sorrow shadowed it. "She told me about you," he said. "About the night you two were locked in that room, the blood oath, the scar, and the guilt she carried for leaving you behind. She never forgave herself." Rachel turned away, tears falling silently down her cheeks. "But she didn't leave me," she whispered. "She protected me in ways I couldn't see." Dominic nodded. "Angela wasn't a hero in the eyes of the world, but to me she was the only one who could stand between light and darkness without losing herself." Rachel opened the metal box once more and pulled out a thin folder she hadn't yet read. Inside were fake passports, records of anonymous wire transfers, and encrypted correspondence. But one letter lay apart from the rest unmarked, except for the words "Times." For Dominic **. Dominic picked it up and read, his expression shifting with each line. Rachel asked quietly, "What does it say?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. "Angela discovered there was someone inside Hope Future pulling the strings, someone above Victor Manzoni, and she suspected it was a man I trusted." Rachel froze. "You know who?" Dominic nodded slowly. "He was my former commanding officer in the interagency task force, the man behind several major operations always vanishing before the investigations reached the top. Angela never found hard proof, but she left a clue in her last video." He replayed the recording, stopping at the moment Victor said he didn't issue orders directly, that he merely followed instructions from those protected by blood and politics. His voice in that fragment trembled, as if the name he dared not speak frightened him more than death itself. Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "So this isn't just about Angela, or the orphanages, or those children. It's about an entire system." Dominic nodded grimly. "And if we want to bring it down, we have to do what Angela never got the chance to do. Expose the one who hides in the shadows and drag them into the light." Rachel stared into the fire, the flames snapping and curling as if feeding on her resolve. She understood what it meant: no safety, no way back. But for the first time in years, her heart did not tremble. Angela was gone, but her spirit was still there, guiding every breath, every step. Rachel laid her hand over the old scar, her voice steady. "I'm ready. Even if I have to walk into hell itself, I'll go." Dominic reached for her hand and held it tightly, because from that night on, they were no longer fighting just for Angela, but for every silenced soul who had never been heard. And there, in the cold wooden cabin buried deep in the forest, two people once broken by their past made a vow. No truth would be forgotten, no pain would be hidden, and no one, no matter how powerful, would ever stand above justice again. Early the next morning, Rachel and Dominic left the secluded cabin deep in the forest, fallen leaves carpeting the path like a silent prelude to an unavoidable confrontation. They moved cautiously, carrying the files, data, and evidence Angela had left behind, preparing for the final strike to expose the human trafficking network they had tracked for years. Dominic drove slowly along the narrow suburban streets, his eyes glued to the tracking device and the call logs left by Angela. Rachel sat beside him, her fingers tightening around the scar on her wrist, a mix of anxiety and determination threading through each heartbeat. Every intersection, every shadow seen in the rearview mirror made her flinch, but fear was not an option. They stopped in front of an old building, its facade appearing abandoned, though motion sensors showed lights active inside. This was the place where records and evidence were exchanged, where the network's leaders felt untouchable. They entered through a side door, hidden in the darkness, and Rachel felt the suffocating weight of power laced with fear. Every file was meticulously arranged, yet each could become a trap if approached incorrectly. Dominic whispered to her, "All of this must be quick and precise. One mistake could cost a life." Rachel nodded, gripping a bag filled with hard drives and documents, following Dominic down the dim hallway. Their footsteps echoed softly, every sense alert, ready for any threat. At the main storage room, Dominic scanned locks and cameras while Rachel prepared to copy the data. Each second was heavy, but when the first file transferred successfully, she felt a small, fleeting relief. Dominic nodded, and they moved to the next room, where the top leaders were holding a meeting. Using Angela's strategy, they stayed indirect, keeping a safe distance, but close enough to capture everything. Rachel saw video footage and images, recognizing faces that had haunted her since the orphanage days, now revealed in their crimes. Her heart ached, but there was no pause. Dominic whispered, "This is the last one if it goes smoothly. We will dismantle the entire network from within." Rachel looked at him, seeing resolve and pain mixed in his eyes, and she knew she was not alone. They worked continuously, moving like shadows, recording every detail, preparing to transmit directly to the FBI to ensure the evidence could not be denied. Finally, after hours of tension, they withdrew safely, carrying every piece of data and proof. Dominic scanned the building one last time before they got into the car. Rachel exhaled, sweat clinging to her forehead, her hand still clutching the scar as if drawing strength from it. As they drove back, dawn broke through the trees, casting golden light on their tired but determined faces. Both understood the final strike had succeeded. The criminal network would be exposed, and victims like Angela would not be forgotten. Yet in Rachel's heart, she knew the fight was far from over. Many steps remained to protect the innocent and fulfill the mission left behind by her lost friend. She looked at Dominic, silently vowing never to abandon this path, because this time, they fought not just for themselves, but for those who had never had the chance to defend themselves. After the night's operation, Rachel and Dominic returned to the safe house just as the city began to stir. A sense of relief washed over them, momentarily easing the exhaustion that weighed on their bodies, but they knew their work was not yet fully complete. The FBI had received all the data they had gathered, and immediately began taking legal action to apprehend the leaders of the human trafficking network. News spread rapidly across media outlets, with headlines announcing the dismantling of an international child trafficking ring. Most of those arrested were the top figures Rachel had once recognized in Angela's files. The satisfaction of justice being served brought a quiet exhale, yet the lingering ache of loss remained. Dominic sat beside her, lightly gripping her hand, a silent reminder that they had faced every danger together. Rachel looked out the window at the morning light spilling over the streets of New York, where lives once threatened were now being protected. They had given victims a chance to live again, and the criminals had no refuge. She felt a profound connection to Angela, to everything her friend had fought to safeguard. Justice was not only about capturing the culprits, but also about continuing the work Angela had begun, ensuring that vulnerable children would be cared for and protected. Dominic turned to her, eyes filled with respect and admiration, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage they had both summoned. Rachel smiled, feeling, perhaps for the first time in years, that Angela's sacrifice had not been in vain, that justice had been done, and that she and Dominic still had the opportunity to continue protecting the defenseless, carrying forward truth and justice together. After justice was served, Rachel stood at the window of her newly reopened veterinary clinic, watching the morning sunlight glint across the busy streets of New York. She felt deeply connected to Angela and all the efforts her friend had left behind. One half of Angela's heart through keepsakes, files, and courageous acts was now returned to the world, carried forward by Rachel's love and dedication. She understood that true value was not only in punishing wrongdoers, but in continuing to protect, care for, and create opportunities for the vulnerable, for abandoned children, and for wounded hearts. It was a lesson in friendship, sacrifice, and belief in justice and humanity, that even when someone is gone, what they leave behind can still transform the lives of others. Rachel wished to speak to every viewer. Each of us can do something meaningful for another person, and courage, perseverance, and love have the power to spread endlessly. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the Dear Single Mom channel, like, and share the video to hear more compelling stories every day. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, reflections, and connections to real life. We want to hear your voices from the depth of your hearts. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video. May everyone watching have good health, joyful days, and lives filled with peace, hope, and trust in the future.